Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Chicago Futures lecture on the Blue City. My name is Tess Conway, and I'm the program coordinator for both Chicago Studies and the program on the global environment. Today's presentation is the third in a series of distinguished lectures, community conversations, and other events that seek to reimagine the future of Chicago after an incredibly difficult period in our city and our nation's history. This series, which we've entitled Chicago Futures, has been developed as a collaboration between two offices within the undergraduate college at the University of Chicago. Chicago Studies, which offers curricular and co-curricular opportunities for the college community to study, engage with, and positively impact the diverse communities of our world-class city, and Parrhesia Program for Public Discourse, which offers courses in programming that aim to develop communicative competence and foster vigorous, inclusive, and productive public discourse within a wide variety of communities. More information about both of these sponsors can be found by visiting the Chicago Studies website. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to remind the students in our audience that Chicago Studies is collaborating with a number of other academic units to offer 4 different immersive course bundles in the spring term. Our Chicago Studies quarters offer deep interdisciplinary explorations of 4 distinct aspects of life in our world-class city: the practice of its democracy and politics, its world-renowned theater community as it reimagines itself in response to the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, the opportunity posed by its historic buildings as we reimagine and rebuild them to confront the challenges of sustainability, and lastly, its identity as water's metropolis, a city that exists because of its proximity to vital waterways. One of the class offerings in that last bundle is being taught by today's lecturer, Sabina Shaikh. More information about each of these quarters and the application for all these rich curricular experiences are available on our website at chicagostudies.uchicago.edu/quarters. We can put that link in the chat momentarily. Our application deadline is tomorrow, so we encourage you to check out these before it's too late. Now, to get our presentation going, I would like to share a piece from Crane's Forum on Lake Michigan entitled Troubled Waters.
A storm rumbles on Lake Michigan's horizon. As it rolls in and the first drops of rain pour from the clouds, they become part of the world's largest freshwater system, the Great Lakes. Lake Michigan and the other Great Lakes account for 20% of the world's freshwater. Yet all is not well with this vital resource, especially for the Chicago area's most vulnerable people. Cheryl Johnson, Executive Director of People for Community Recovery.
Water is a human right issue. Nobody should have to live without water.
With more people staying home because of COVID-19, water use and expenses are up, according to Johnson.
The more you're in a house, the more water use there's going to be.
Water costs rose significantly in the last 10 years, and those rising costs can lead to water shutoffs for those who have fallen behind on paying their water bills. The increase in the cost of water outpaced median household income growth in that same time. This rise cost lower income people a much larger percentage of their income than their richer counterparts. One reason for the increased water burden is how Chicago's water system pulls in Lake Michigan water and sends it out to homes and businesses. To get there, water must travel through an aging water infrastructure system in need of constant repair. These repairs drive up water prices, and the aging system threatens the safety of our water, both of which disproportionately affect lower-income people and people of color. Water issues related to climate change's impact, such as frequent heavy rainstorms, hit poorer communities and communities of color in the region harder too. The region has seen an increase in spring rainfall over the last several years, These storms lead to more flooded streets, backyards, and basements all around the Lake Michigan and Mississippi River watershed. Excessive flooding mixes with our wastewater, overpowering sewage systems and forcing raw sewage into an already stressed Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan water levels are also at historic highs, attributable at least in part to climate change. This results in erosion that's destroying beaches and shorelines. Mila Marshall, clean water advocate at the Illinois Sierra Club.
We're seeing shoreline erosion that is damaging breakwaters as well as creating flooding issues. There are communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and we know those communities to be African American communities, low income communities, and immigrant communities. South Shore is at risk of losing a lot more than just their lakefront property, but possible investments into that community.
Even though Lake Michigan is under near constant stress, in many ways it's never been in greater demand. And as climate change throttles the rest of Illinois and the country, Great Lakes water may be more desirable.
South Shore is one of the richest black communities in the world. It is right next to a source of fresh drinking water. That is an amenity. That is a resource. That is gold. They are not poor. They are water rich, and what they're in need of is some assistance to manage their resource in a way that allows for them to use it as an asset.
Now, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Sabina Shaikh, the director of the program on the global environment and a senior lecturer in the environmental and urban studies in the college, the Committee on Geographical Sciences in the Social Sciences Division, and at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. She's the faculty director of Chicago Studies and co-leads the Environmental Frontiers Initiative at the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation. Her research focuses on the relationship of humans to environmental change related to health, livelihoods, and migration. Her collaborative research on water sustainability in the Mekong Basin of Cambodia has been funded by the National Science Foundation and recently by the Center for International Social Science Research, Social Science Research Center at the Newberg Collegium at the University of Chicago. Welcome, Sabina.
Thank you so much, Tess, and thank you to Joe Bonney, who's running our webinar, and the great intro from the Cranes Forum. I'm thrilled and honored to be here tonight to host this event on such an important topic. I'll be introducing our speakers in a moment, but first I wanted to say a few things about Chicago and water, which are near and dear to my heart. It's hard to understate the importance of water in Chicago's history, its present, and its future. Certainly, water is integral to human existence and survival. It's a basis for civilization, the reason for the rise and fall of empires, cultures, and societies. Chicago, was in the middle, right? It was not proximate to an ocean or a coast, but from the start, it had massive potential with its flat terrain, rich prairies, abundance of water, and relative proximity to every part of the continent. Chicago was settled. Eventually, the connections were built through water, through rail eventually. And between 1850 and 1870, Chicago's population grew by 10 times. As we heard so eloquently from our first Chicago Futures speaker, Carl Smith, even the Great Chicago Fire, which destroyed a third of the city, didn't slow the city down. If anything, it hastened its arrival. Integral to this expansion was Chicago's location, its proximity to the Big Lake and the river. And by 1893, the city was home to more than 1 million people. This massive growth was fueled by changes to the water landscape. Chicago, after all, was a swamp. It needed to be dried, lifted up, and re-engineered to make water serve its valuable economic purpose. The river was reversed, waterways were built and connected, the lakefront was planned, and the Great Lakes were connected to the Atlantic Ocean to form a new coast in North America. Today, Chicago is both as water rich and water dependent as ever. Only 3% of the globe's water is fresh water. Most of that is frozen or inaccessible deep underground. 20% of global freshwater stored right here in the Midwest near Chicago. The city's future is as water dependent as ever. The opening piece from Cranes highlights the challenges facing Chicago and many other cities today and in the future as the climate continues to change. The resiliency of our water infrastructure is of major concern in helping to provide safe drinking water, manage rising lake levels, localized flooding, shoreline erosion. Technology is advancing rapidly, but needs the appropriate policy mechanisms to ensure efficient and equitable uptake to address pollution, flooding, invasive species, increased demand for lake waters in areas where groundwaters become scarce and expensive. Today, we consider these challenges through a discussion of the opportunities for the Blue City, a vision for water to be the catalyst for Chicago as a prosperous, sustainable, resilient, and equitable city. Chicago, in addition to being a place for the confluence of water, is a place of great collective expertise in the subject, from academia, public policy and practice, architecture and design, to journalism and reporting. Today, we're fortunate to have some of these experts on these topics here with us to have our conversation. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to remind everyone to please use the Q&A feature at any time. I will ask each of our speakers to take a few minutes to present their ideas, after which we'll have a conversation before moving into the Q&A. Please submit your questions and I will relay them to our speakers. Now I'd like to ask our speakers to join and introduce them. Hello, everyone. So it is my great pleasure to be here with my friends, my water friends and colleagues. I'm going to introduce everyone and then ask each one for a short presentation of their ideas. So first we have Seth Darling. Dr. Darling is the director of the Center for Molecular Engineering and a senior scientist at Argonne National Lab. His group's research centers around molecular engineering with a current emphasis on advanced materials for cleaning water, including the award-winning Oleo sponge. I have to say, the first time I met Seth, he was giving a presentation on the Oleo sponge, and I haven't left him alone since then. It's such a fascinating technology. So I highly encourage everybody to watch the video of that technology. Seth has published over 125 scientific articles, holds a dozen patents, is a co-author of several popular environmental books, including How to Change Minds About Our Changing Climate, and most recently, Water Is, the Indispensability of Water in Society and Life. Seth gives frequent public lectures, which you can find online, including one very compelling and relevant, The End of Water as We Know It. Seth is currently teaching at the University of Chicago. His undergraduate course is called The Science, History, Policy, and Future of Water. Next, we have Elena Harkness. Elena is the executive director of Current, which launched in 2016 in partnership with the City of Chicago, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, World Business Chicago, and the region's research universities, including the University of Chicago. Current's goal is to support the development and export of homegrown solutions to help solve the world's water challenges through monitoring, evaluation, and supporting new ideas and technology in water management. Elena most recently served as a managing director for the economic development firm RW Ventures. And before that, she held a research fellowship in urban governance at the Brookings Institution and led urban development strategy for the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Elena is also a non-resident fellow in the Global Cities program at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Next, we have Martin Felsen. Martin is the co-founder and director of Urban Lab, an architecture and urban design firm based in Chicago. He's also a fellow at the American Institute of Architects. Martin is an associate professor and the director of Master of Architecture program at IIT. His professional work blends design and research to produce uniquely progressive projects, resulting in a new aesthetic for environmentally resilient architecture, landscapes, and public space. Urban Lab's design visions include Growing Water, Filter Island, and the Free Water District, just to name a few of the innovative ideas for closing the loop on water use in Chicago and across the globe. Martin is the co-author of the recent book, Bowling, Water, Architecture, and Urbanism, which explores how city-based megaforms can become an updated architecture-based urbanism, a conjecture of what a comprehensible city could be to combat predicted crises. Martin is currently also a visiting fellow and faculty at the University of Chicago, where he's teaching a design studio course, I believe he's in his classroom right now, entitled Lakefront Kiosk. Finally, we have Tony Briscoe. Tony is the current reporter for ProPublica. I hope you have read and seen his recent series of thoughtful and provoking articles on disinvestment of Black neighborhoods in Chicago. He previously worked at the Chicago Tribune as an environmental reporter, writing extensively about issues facing the Great Lakes and the impacts of climate change in the Midwest. In writing these feature stories, he traveled to each Great Lake to learn how people were experiencing change. He covered topics ranging from rising lake levels to plastic pollution, and highlighted the work of UChicago professor Maureen Coleman in her lab in mapping microbes in the Great Lakes. Tony's reporting on the Illinois EPA Environmental Justice Program revealed lapses in the state outreach efforts to low-income and minority communities, leading to reform and community engagement practices. In 2019, he received the Peter Lisagor Award for Best Science and Environmental Reporting in Chicago. And I know those were very long introductions, but I haven't even said enough about each person. So with that, I wanted to ask each of you to give a short introduction of your work. And I'd like to start with Seth. Seth Darling. Seth, while policy and management can go a long way towards addressing water challenges, can you speak to some of the emerging opportunities for science and technology to mitigate water stress and water challenges, both regionally and globally?
I can. Can you see my slide there, by the way?
Sure can.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much, Sabina. Thanks to everyone for attending. This is a fantastic panel that I'm honored to be a part of. So as Sabina mentioned, I'm based at Argonne National Laboratory. This is one of two DOE labs, Department of Energy labs, located in the Chicago suburbs, the other being Fermilab. We often get confused with one another. Fermilab's the one that does high energy physics, but Argonne is a multidisciplinary science and engineering research center. And what we do is we seek to answer the biggest questions facing humanity, from how to obtain affordable clean energy to protecting ourselves and our environment, including water. And let me give you a few examples of some of the things that we're tackling. So you may not be aware, but Chicago is actually home to one of the world's largest wastewater treatment plants in Stickney, just outside the city. And you can see it pictured in the upper right here. The circles that you see are settling tanks. All the rectangles in between are digester tanks. And inside those tanks, which you can see in the bigger picture, there are microorganisms that feed on the waste in the water, cleaning it up. And those microorganisms need lots of extra oxygen to keep them going, which is why there's air being bubbled into the tanks. That's all the turbulence you see there and the bubbles coming up to the surface. Turns out that that is actually an enormous use of energy. It's the largest use of energy in water treatment and represents a significant expense. If you could make those little air bubbles smaller, you would dramatically increase the efficiency because there would be more surface area and the oxygen could diffuse more easily out of the bubbles and into the water. So here's an example of where science and technology can make an impact. Here I'm going to show two videos side by side. On the left is a regular membrane that we're bubbling air through. On the right is the same membrane, but we played with the surface chemistry, and you can see the dramatic impact it has on the bubble size, where on the left, the bubbles were basically as big as the container, and on the right, they're very small, meaning there's going to be much more efficient diffusion of oxygen, translating to huge energy savings. Another big water challenge, oil spills, big and small, that plague waterways all over the world, including right here in Chicagoland. Now, most of the oil, when it's spilled, is actually never cleaned up. The small fraction that is cleaned up is usually either skimmed off the surface or more often it's burned, turning a water pollution problem into an air pollution problem. And neither of those techniques work unless the oil's thick on the surface and the water is calm, which of course is not always the case. What would be great is if you could soak up the oil with a material, recover the oil, and then reuse both the oil and the material, having no waste whatsoever in the end. And so this is the technology that Sabina was referring to, called oleosponge, that we developed for this purpose. So here you'll see a little sponge, a piece of foam that we've again played with the surface chemistry on it to make it love oil and hate water. So here's an oil spill. We've just dyed it blue to make it a little easier to see on water. And you can see what the oleosponge can do, where it selectively and rapidly grabs just the oil, not grabbing any water. But importantly, you can recover the oil easily by simply squeezing it, and you can actually reuse the oleosponge again. And as you'll see here in a moment, you can actually do this over and over and over again. And we actually don't know what the limits on reusability are, because the poor postdoc here in this video, his name was Ed, he gets tired squeezing this thing out before we see any drop in performance. So I don't actually know how many times it can be reused. So those are just two examples of some recent innovations from Argonne. but there are many more under exploration to make better use of our water resources. And it's all about rethinking the water cycle, if you will, not the traditional geologic water cycle, but the human use water cycle, where we take water from some natural source, in our case, Lake Michigan, we use it for something, agriculture, industry, what have you. We'll treat it in a wastewater treatment plant and then put it back. It's a once through process. And there's all kinds of ways we can improve on this process. We're doing things like figuring out how old groundwater actually is so that we can manage the resource. Turns out nobody knew before. We're studying how microbes interact with these natural water systems and how they can be beneficial. We're looking at how to make agriculture more efficient, the largest consumer of water in the world. I showed you the oleosponge, ways we're cleaning up water once it's been polluted. And we're also developing things like sensor technologies to figure out what are the pollutants in the water so we know what we have to do to clean them up and we can point to who's polluting it. But the real innovation is this. It's rethinking the entire water cycle. Instead of doing a once through process, you want to reuse and recycle the water, the same water, back again and reuse it. To do that, though, we're going to need a lot of advanced technologies because wastewater is very challenging to treat back to being fit for use. We're going to need sorbents that can selectively pull out pollutants, catalysts that can break down challenging pollutants. We're going to need to be able to have surfaces that don't get fouled by all the gunk that's in wastewater. And all of those are things that we're working on at Argonne. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it back to you, Sabina.
Thank you, Seth. That was great. I didn't know we were going to get to see the oleo sponge again, so thank you for sharing that. So I wanted to turn to Elena, who's also involved in sort of the technology space. Elena, in your recent piece that you wrote for Cranes, Build Back Bluer, you speak to the idea of a blue economy, one that is productive, innovative, and inclusive. In the Blue City, Chicago is the hub for local and global water technology innovation, as we just saw here, comprised of world-class water utilities, renowned research institutions, innovative businesses, and entrepreneurs. My question for you is, are those pieces already here? And if so, how do we bring this all together? How do we get to the Blue City?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sabina, and I'm so glad to be here with all of these wonderful leaders in the community to talk about that. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen and talk about Current's role sort of sitting as an innovation hub at the center of so many of the activities, trying to bring in all the exciting work that Seth and others are doing. I love following Seth and his virtual science fair because it is so inspiring every time I see all of these innovations and inventions in action, and it just makes me so excited to think about what else we can all build if we work together. So Current, my organization, it's here to sort of answer this shared question. Why are all of us here today talking about the Blue City? I think we all have this shared sense that we need more healthy water to drink and less flood water in our basements. The Cranes video teed up how those challenges are really coming home here in Chicago, and Seth's just taken it to sort of a global scale. But we as a Chicago-based innovation hub are thinking a lot about how we can take that problem orientation and really turn it into solutions right here at home. So how do we create, all those water problems from those, create blue jobs that are putting Chicagoans to work, growing companies like the oleo sponge, inventions built right here that can solve water challenges, not just in our backyards, but also around the world. And so Current's problem statement is, this is all great. What Seth is talking about, this invention activity, we have so many hubs and centers of that here, but we're not really doing it fast enough collectively. And the we here, I'm talking a lot about Chicago and the Midwest, but generally around the world, our water problems are growing at a scale and pace that is really just challenging us to get faster and more innovative and better at solving them. So our approach here is that innovation, especially in something as complex as water, our challenges are too big and too complicated for any single institution or individual or organization to take on by themselves. So this kind of collaboration that we need to come up with those solutions takes partnerships. These are often long-term. It takes people across industries and sectors working together and thinking about how we can all kind of create a common agenda and de-risk our involvement so that we can really build something that's greater than the sum of each of our individual contributions. So Current does that. Sorry. You asked, Sabina, whether or not we have the building blocks here in Chicago. And the answer, I think, to this inclusive blue economy question is that we have some of them. We have some really great assets, and we've already talked about a few of them. The obvious water assets that we talk about sort of in the backyard, obviously Lake Michigan and our river system. We think about this fresh water as being a really big resource to the human population and also for the economy. That's really true. But we less frequently talk about the test bed opportunities here with the large number of corporate anchor institutions that we have, and also governments, the big utilities. Seth started talking about MWRD and the very large wastewater treatment plant. We also have some of the biggest drinking water facilities in the world here in Chicago. So all of those offer an opportunity to test and try new inventions and think about how we bring them to scale, because we have this really interesting scale to try problem solving here. We also have this really diverse array of headquarters companies, and some of them are not the ones that you'd think of as necessarily being blue economy, right? So food and beverage, manufacturing, things that Chicago is known for because we have so many great headquarters companies building and making things and shipping them all around the world, doing it right here in Chicago. Lots of them are heavy water users, and they're all thinking about the need for technology to actually solve those problems, reduce the use of water in their business, offer cleaner water. So we tend to think about the blue economy at Current as both the supply side of water technology innovation, which a lot of that is what Seth was talking about, but also the demand side. So companies that know that they need technology to solve their problems, and a lot of what Current's trying to do is bring them together. So we also have what I think of as a lot of the innovation assets that help make this sort of innovation ecosystem work well. So it's incubators. Many people here, I'm sure, have heard of 1871. We also have Matter. We have M-Hub that's working on advanced manufacturing. These are specialized organizations that are really helping to give a leg up to entrepreneurs that are working in this hard tech space. 1871, of course, a lot of software, but soft and hard tech accelerators that are really helping us take companies from bench to market and grow them. And of course, the research universities and national labs that are providing all of the fuel for those new ideas in the first place. So Chicago, lots of the building blocks are here. But those alone are not enough. When I say we want to build an inclusive blue economy, lots of people are, we could say, that sounds great. What do you mean? And we really need a plan for the region. We need to have a shared fact-based vision of what it means to grow this economy, and specifically, what are the things that we're really great at? Seth talked about many different kinds of innovations in water. And, we could say tomorrow that we want to figure out how to send, the next mission to Mars here in Chicago, and we could talk about it all day, and that doesn't mean that Chicago is specifically well equipped to do that. Chicago is specifically well equipped to build some really exciting next generation solutions around water. We need a really clear roadmap for what those are. And then number two here, we need a map of some of the opportunity gaps, because when we talk about building a blue economy, that's alone not the most important thing. It's building an inclusive blue economy that actually takes all of our assets and figures out how to get them, off the sidelines and into the market, and creating opportunity for the people in places that too often have been left out in mainstream economic development strategy. So I think that's the future opportunity here. So we need clear strategies to execute against. A lot of these are familiar in sort of the workforce development and entrepreneurship space, but applied to water, they're specific. There's very specific career tracks in water infrastructure, water engineering, and entrepreneurship, as I said, in water, what it takes to bring ideas to market scale. It's a long-term development pathway. There are very long-term sales cycles when you're dealing with utilities in some cases. So there's lots of things that are unique to water problem solving that we really need to develop some special strategies to solve for if we really want to see the impact that we hope for. And we need really focused cross-sector leadership. So part of that is what Current is set up to do. And our vision for Chicago's blue economy, where do we want to be in 2030? We really want to build that in collaboration with the kinds of people that are represented here around this virtual table today, but also many others. So we have partnerships that span, as I said, the research institutions and national labs, industry, the policy advocates that are helping create the conditions for this blue economy. And we really want to help drive and build those kinds of collaborations. So we try to be an unbiased advocate, and we're leading with knowing what water tech is out there. And we have sort of a technology-oriented problem-solving approach, but it's not only technology. We really understand how important the policy and regulatory innovation also is to achieving this goal of solving problems faster. A lot of what we do is focused on building the community that allows for the smarter problem solving. We do convenings, maybe some of you have been on part of them, and we're really excited to participate in conversations like today. But we also have platforms, Blue EDU to collect educational tools for K through 12 classrooms, Blue Jobs, which is trying to create a sense of shared opportunity in the blue economy. And those are all, really early building blocks on the path to having what we think of as a really inclusive pipeline of people that are interested in careers and interested in building inventions and becoming sort of the next generation innovators that will power all of this. And we also, I think, are a bit unique because we also do pilots, and a pillar of our work is trying to solve the backyard challenges that the Cranes Forum has teed up. So on occasion, we will actually serve as a technology tester and help bring pilots, match them with the right pilot sites. This picture on the right is one of our interns who's been working with us to help develop real-time water quality monitoring in the Chicago River. So that's an area where we actually find technology, deploy it, and try to figure out how we can use it to best solve one of our really pressing backyard problems here in Chicago. And we're developing a pipeline to deal with a lot of other emerging challenges. We have exciting work underway with a number of partners to use wastewater as an early warning indicator for SARS-CoV-2. We're working on PFAS and forever chemicals, lead detection. So the list goes on, but the list will continue to grow because that's the nature of water innovation work. We're discovering new things about the problems all the time. And all of those are fuel for this invention and problem solving that can really be a powerful driver of economic opportunity. So I'm going to quickly go through here and just say we have a terrific board of directors that really helps ground our work. And you'll see many familiar names here, University of Chicago, of course, and other universities. But our utilities are partners and they're at our table. And I think that's a really important feature of the way CURIT's built, because working with the public sector is such an important part of leading the change here. We have many other partners, and we are excited to share our impact and growing. We're really kind of tracking the blue economy growth by how many network connections we've made, the kinds of technologies we're evaluating, funding that we're helping to secure. So we can help technologies, help our university partners demonstrate that their technologies have broader impact on the community. And again, pilot projects that we're bringing to market. So what will it take to build an inclusive blue economy together? I think it's going to take many more conversations like this one and to start to fill in some of these gaps in strategy, but starting to build this coherent narrative for what it is that we can expect from our blue city and what are the sort of high bar that we should set as we work together to fill some of these gaps and create a truly inclusive pipeline. I'm really excited to find new partnerships and have Current be part of accelerating that path. So really excited to continue this conversation.
Thank you, Elena. In the spirit of collaboration, we try to do the same thing here at the University of Chicago, is find everybody who's working on water and bring them together. So I understand at your scale, it's a much more complicated process. So I wanted to continue in this line about innovation and turn to land use. And so I want to talk to Martin about your work, which has long focused on design as a mechanism to create healthy spaces. And you've worked on very practical applications in partnership with groups like the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and MWD, who we've mentioned a few times here, while at the same time creating more speculative visions for the future, like the Free Water District, which attracts businesses and residents from water scarce areas, and Filter Island, which is this really cool utopia and recreational amenity that manages both stormwater and invasive species. So imagine that. I was wondering if you could talk more about these designs and how they bring together architecture, urbanism, and environment, and how a city like Chicago can use land use planning to accommodate such visions.
Okay, thank you, Sabina, very much. And yeah, I'll try to tie together some ideas of water cycle and the blue economy. I'm here with my students in class, so that's why I'm wearing this mask. Hopefully you can have learned to trust people with masks on. I know it's not It's that simple. I'm going to start with this diagram, which is showing that Chicago is the only city in the Great Lakes that doesn't return the water that it uses to the basin. And this is by legal right. We're allowed to do this. The water that we pull out essentially does get cleaned to a certain degree and then gets pushed down the canals system to the Illinois River, to the Mississippi River, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a diagram of that open loop. And Sabina talked about closed and open loops. We basically take out 1.5 billion with a B gallons of water a day from the Great Lakes. We mix it with rain and we essentially discard it as if it didn't have as much value as it of course does. And Seth showed this, an image of the Stickney wastewater treatment plant. I just wanted to show you how that looks from a land management point of view of this facility, which is huge, is located on the other side of the subcontinental divide actually, and releases water into that canal and again, out of the city down through the United States. So this is what a lot of our projects try to do, speculate on closing the loop. And we have a number of projects that we've worked on with the city and the state, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and so forth, that at different scales thinks about closing the loop in order to hold on to this incredibly valuable resource, but also act as ethical stewards of the environment. And when so many other cities, even in the United States, are running out of water and looking at us just throwing it out, I think we can do a better job from a social point of view as well. And we've combined the project that I want to show today with this idea, which everyone is familiar with, which is the declining manufacturing jobs. Chicago's South Side has an infrastructure that can withstand an enormous number of industries to move back in that have relocated elsewhere. And that's where we begin a site that we worked on with the Metropolitan Reclamation District to try to bring back corporations and industries that have enormous water footprints. That is, whatever service or product that they're making, an enormous amount of water goes into that manufacturing or that product or that whatever function it is that is being produced. And so the idea is to attract these industries back to Chicago with one giant incentive, which in this particular case is water. And I guess we play around with this idea of free water. Water is never free, of course, but it is available in our city. And here's a good example of that. This is the wastewater treatment plant in Calumet on the south side of Chicago. This is a channel of water, 150 million gallons a day, that is essentially released out of the city, out of the Great Lakes Basin, and sort of lost as a resource. And this is also 150 million gallon per day aqueduct that feeds Los Angeles. This is an absolute lifeline to the city, one of them anyway. There's not that many, and without these kind of channels, that city would have an enormous set of problems on its hands in this very artificially constructed environment. So our site that we worked with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District is circled there in pink. You can see it in relationship to the loop and the lake, the Calumet area, and the CalSag channel, because that's where that 150 million gallons of water is released per day. So the idea is to connect the wastewater treatment plant and that water with this site that would be available to industries that want to move to Chicago and take advantage of this water that is absolutely available very, very inexpensively. And in a sense, ready to be utilized again, since we've already used it once. So we mapped out industries that could potentially take advantage of that 150 million gallons of water per day. These are some of them. There are of course many, and you can even imagine all of them. But when you also imagine that companies and corporations are spending millions and millions of dollars, often in very stressed environments where water is contested for all sorts of different reasons, it does make sense at a certain point, I think, that companies would turn their attention to relocating in a water-rich area where water won't be contested. And in fact, it helps to, in fact, close a loop in our own water cycle, which is currently open. So here we see a map, and this is not a big site. So we determined that we could fit a number of industries into the site, and we'd only actually be using 20 million gallons of water that's been mostly treated per day. It's called effluent. And this blue line and gray line then become this 20 million gallon loop that partly takes the mass of water that we release every day, but a small loop, one small loop at a time, can eventually close the much bigger loops that are at work. Okay, here's how it looks on the ground. So we called it a park when we were working on it, because it's both an industrial park, but also a community park. And we worked carefully to make sure that at least half of the land would be available for the significant number of communities that are around the Calumet area that don't have a lot of access to open green space, and certainly don't have access to a kind of ecological zone in which they could recreate and also participate in the new jobs that would form in the area. I'm not gonna dig into the details here, but I thought that I would just share some of the diagrams that we made based around the research. In this particular case, textile manufacturing, where textile raw materials would be brought into Chicago after they were created. We're not proposing agriculture or anything else on the site. But even at the end of the cycle of creating clothing or other kind of products, there's an enormous amount of water that gets used in that part of the process as well. And so we wanted to basically map the economic output that this water would allow us to produce, and the jobs that would be created alongside. Here is a paper mill, and on the left is a typical paper mill diagram where forests would be cut down and utilized as part of the process. In our process, we speculated on recycling paper from the city and then breaking that down, which uses a huge amount of water, and then producing all sorts of paper-based recycled products. Some of those paper products could be used to bottle water, of course, but all sorts of beverages that are a fairly substantial part of the economy. Anybody that watches sports realizes that beer commercials are basically driving a lot of that sector. And so we thought we could package beer in paper made from the water that we were recycling. And ultimately, we created this industrial ecology where waste would be utilized as resource in many different, across many of the different industries. Water at this point being just one of those waste products that would be recycled into resource. And my last slide here is perhaps how it could look in the end, where we see both parts of the park. We see the new manufacturing buildings, get a sense of the new jobs and all the new research opportunities. And then the community park, where reestablishing these manufacturing and service-oriented jobs would also strengthen the community, and this park would then become a significant asset in the middle of that community that's seen quite a decline over the last several decades. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. That was fascinating. And I noticed you had 66 slides, so we'll have to come again to see the rest of them or take your class. So, but I wanted to turn to Tony Briscoe from ProPublica. Tony, you've written about most of the challenges that were put forth in that Cranes piece that we started with here. By talking to people on the ground and those most affected by things like rising lake levels, localized flooding, invasive species, and most recently, your articles in ProPublica have looked at disinvestment in Black neighborhoods in Chicago, which is certainly not unrelated to environmental conditions. With water, there are many potential sources of inequity, including accessibility of the lakefront, safe, affordable drinking water, localized flooding. I'm wondering if you're able to connect these pieces that speak to the relationship between water and disinvestment for us.
No, absolutely. Let me try and share my screen here. I've been a reporter and had the privilege to report on these issues for going on 7 years now in the Chicago area. And it's just, I feel very fortunate to report on these issues and report on what I think many people consider our greatest asset in this region, which is water. I think what has already been said is that, we have the largest system of fresh water on the planet, right in our own backyard. 20% of, the fresh water on this planet above ground is pretty much under the control of 40 million people, which is half a percentage of the global population. It's such a tremendous asset through the lens of climate change, where water availability is not a guarantee for many regions. But I really had the opportunity to delve into these issues in my latest series, Great Lakes High Stakes, in which we wanted to look at what an asset we have here, not only from a local and a regional standpoint, but from a national and a global standpoint. So as I mentioned, we have the largest system of surface fresh water on the planet, but also what I think kind of goes unnoticed is the fact that we have the longest shoreline in the mainland United States outside of Alaska. We have a multi-billion-dollar fishing industry and shipping industry going all the way. Chicago is connected to the Gulf of Mexico through the Mississippi River Basin, and then also through the St. Lawrence Seaway. And since all the Great Lakes are connected, going all the way to Lake Ontario. But what we wanted to do with the Great Lakes High Stakes series is essentially look at, how, all the Great Lakes in our region is changing with climate change. As you can see, these are numbers from GLERO, the Great Lakes Research Lab through NOAA, and our region is getting warmer. We are seeing less ice cover. It's been historically wetter, and increasingly, as I think that this snowfall that we've recently got has shown, its precipitation is coming down in bunches more and more. And even though we're seeing this somewhat uniform, trends throughout the region, we're seeing a lot of the same things with climate change. Each of the Great Lakes are responding to them differently. A lot of my colleagues over at the Chicago Tribune used to say that I talked about the Great Lakes like they were my children, but it's true. It's climate change is essentially an illness that each of the Great Lakes are exposed to, but they're responding differently based off of their characteristics. Whether that's their depth, their surroundings, whether they're further north, south. If it's an urban area, agricultural. And so essentially we wanted to look at what makes these communities special and essentially, how that is changing through the lens of climate change. And so we looked at increasingly intense algae blooms in Lake Erie, water level fluctuation, which we're actually seeing here in Chicago also, since Lake Michigan shares the same water level as Lake Huron, because water goes back and forth through the Straits of Mackinac. And this was, when we visited the Lachino Islands over in Lake Huron. But ice loss over in Lake Superior, which is the most acute out of all the Great Lakes, where we're now seeing ferries running all year round, which is super uncommon, and it has only happened recently, even though we have more than a century of observations from certain areas and harbors. And with more water, means more water traveling downstream through the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is increasingly difficult for freighters, which are moving our goods to travel upstream to bring those shipments. And the lake that you all are here for and probably care most about, it's just really been a pleasure to report on Lake Michigan and how synonymous this lake is with the city. So it's an interesting problem that we're seeing here in Lake Michigan. And in addition to the fluctuations, we are just really naturally predisposed to these really strong storms just because of the configuration. You get these really strong southerly winds that can build a wave towards the northern end, and it pretty much rakes it, and they come crashing at 20, 25 feet when they get down to Chicago. So you combine that in with this artificial shoreline here that, the original shoreline of Lake Michigan here in Chicago was Michigan Avenue. So we've built out considerably, and we're expected to see, or we should have expected to see, big water waves in these regions, yet we have these huge steep drop-offs. So, we're seeing intensifying storms, which this was, what I saw when I first came to Chicago in 2014 was the Halloween storm and the damage that it brought to the shoreline. I mean, we're not talking about, a quick Band-Aid approach that can easily be paved over. This is significant damage that we're seeing. And these storms are, becoming stronger with climate change. But also that fluctuation that I talked about, just if you look at what that means for Chicago, we hit an all-time low in January of 2013. It was the lowest mark that we had ever seen on record in more than a century of record keeping. And, within, less than 7 years, it looked like an infinity pool when you're talking about Lake Michigan, to where a lake that's the size of West Virginia had, risen nearly 6 feet. That's an incredible amount of water when you consider to only rise an inch, to increase the water level an inch in Lake Michigan, it requires 25 trillion gallons of water. So just to put that in context. And it really hasn't only been, Lake Michigan. I mean, this is an entire system. This is some of the flooding that we saw on the Chicago River, which has been a challenge when we saw unprecedented rains last May. Typically when we see heavy rains and it pours into the Chicago River, because we have such a hardened, surface here, what MWRD is able to do is reverse the river and alleviate the river by sending it back out into Lake Michigan. But for the first time in recent memory, Lake Michigan was higher than, the Chicago River, which meant that was not an option. And we saw really catastrophic flooding in downtown, which actually knocked the power out in Willis Tower, though. So the tallest skyscraper in the city. So I think that innovation continues to be, the solution to many of these problems. And I'm glad that we're having the conversation here. But through the lens of disparity, I think that it really boils down to resources, and I think it boils down to infrastructure. Whether you're talking about the quality of drinking water, whether you're talking about different stretches of shoreline in Chicago, certainly from 47th Street to 55th Street on the south side of Chicago is one of the most dilapidated parts of the shoreline, which has been that way since it hasn't been reconstructed since the mid 20th century. And we've seen, a number of, repaving projects in other parts of the city. And also, I think that we've also, it's been chronicled that, some of the worst flooding that we see, just talking about urban flooding, has been on the south side of Chicago in neighborhoods like Chatham. And so how can innovation play a role in alleviating that flooding there, whether that's through permeable pavement to allow, increasing rainfall to percolate through, whether rain gardens are a solution, whether it's rain barrels. I think it's certainly a conversation that needs to be had, but at the end of the day, I think that it really boils down to resources and replacing some of this old infrastructure.
Great, thank you so much, Tony. That was really a great tour of all of your visits to the Great Lakes, but I know I would encourage everybody to go and read the articles. Particularly, there's some amazing photography and visuals too that accompany all of the exceptional writing. And I would just like to tell everybody that a lot of the resources that our speakers referred to are on our event page, so you could go there and read some of the pieces that we're talking about, or link to the books that some of the Seth and Martin have written, into Martin's website for the designs. We've had a lot of questions coming in, and I have a whole list of questions that I wanted to ask, and I just added more, but in the interest of time, let me start with one, and then maybe we'll go to the audience ones. I just wanted to follow up on what you were just talking about, Tony, because I think that what we're witnessing right now in Texas is making us all acutely aware of the challenges of our infrastructure to be resilient now, just at this moment, but in the future with respect to climate change. So, usually May is the rainiest month in Chicago. I think the last 3 Mays in Chicago have been the rainiest 3 months in Chicago's history. So we only expect that. The projections are, we expect that to increase, to continue. Tony, we were spying on your Twitter account before the event, and we noticed that you tweeted yesterday about, in addition to the looming rains, there's 40 inches of snow that have to melt this spring. The lake is covered in ice that has to melt. So I guess my question to the whole panel really is, Seth and Martin showed us that Chicago has some of the largest water infrastructure in the world, but are we equipped to handle this? Are we equipped we know about combined sewer overflows. Are we equipped to handle the projections for climate change? How do we become more resilient? Do we have to keep building bigger, right? I mean, green infrastructure can only do so much. And what can we do to make our neighborhoods, and certain neighborhoods especially, less vulnerable to what seems like inevitable flooding? So I could call on one of you, but I'd like to just open it up to anyone who might have some thoughts about that. Actually, why don't we start with maybe with you, Seth, since we haven't heard from you in a while, and you've been probably thinking about these issues.
Sure, yeah. So Chicago has thought really big about water since the beginnings of Chicago, from having the first, comprehensive sewer system in the country, to reversing the Chicago River, to having the largest water purification plant, the largest wastewater purification plant, and the TARP system too, which you were just referring to, about the combined sewer system and trying to deal with that. And all of these have been, to kind of draw an analogy from strategies for water engineering in China, have been a Confucian kind of approach of like, let's just make water do what we want it to do. And that works to some extent, but there's an alternative philosophy, if you will, to managing water, which is the more Taoist approach of kind of allowing water to flow the way it wants to flow, and just kind of gently nudging things. And this gets to some of the principles that Martin was introducing about using natural structures to help manage water, to clean water. Mother Nature cleans water very well, and we take that ability away when we just pave over everything. So using plants to help clean up water, using porous surfaces, as Tony briefly alluded to, I think, to drain away water in a easier way than having to go through a wastewater treatment plant and overwhelming the system. So that TARP system, that the deep tunnel that is managing those overflows, is massive, and it's not even done being built yet. But the projections are that with these major events that are coming with climate disruption, it still won't be big enough. So no, we can't build bigger and get our way out of this. It's about building smarter, I think.
If I could add something, a couple of mayors ago, we worked on a project to redesign the streets to be much more permeable. And we redesigned them with multifunctional purposes, especially alternative transportation systems. Essentially, we always dig up the streets. We all know that. So why not every once in a while spend the same amount of money to make them permeable, to make sure that big flood events can at least have the first step to capturing the first, let's say, half an inch of rain that falls on the street can be done locally. At the same time, we were working on that. The mayor of Philadelphia visited Chicago. Philadelphia was considering doing what Chicago has done, which is to spend huge money to build centralized systems, either tunnels or whatever other kind of gray infrastructure systems. And the mayor of Philadelphia looked around, toured all of the facilities, went back to Philadelphia, and 6 months later came out with a significant report saying that he'd rather spend billions of dollars in communities building green infrastructure. So building parks, building the streets in a way that would absorb rainwater, having green roofs, and essentially spending the money on centralized systems, on distributed systems. The same money would be spent to do the same thing, but everybody would benefit from it. Because right now, I think the one problem in Chicago, as well as other cities, is that so much money gets spent on projects that no one sees, and therefore no one appreciates. And when it comes time to spending more money, nobody really wants to support. And so I think that having a set of green strategies also get a lot of people on board from the point of view of spending money in the first place to find benefits very locally that they can get behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna, just to build on that, I think this is definitely a space where the both and approach is so necessary, because there are really important ways that at the kind of individual household level, programs like the Rain Ready program in Chicago, where you can come have an assessment of your basement flooding and see what sort of low cost green infrastructure solutions might be possible. That's very empowering to be able to sort of get help and take action at the level of your household where you're feeling it most. All of that's made easier by big infrastructure projects that are kind of minimizing the amount of water that's flooding into those basements in the first place. But I do think we need both. And to Martin's point, it does really help build both awareness and political will when you can sort of see the benefits of those kinds of investments and start to tell those stories.
And just to briefly piggyback, I would say that it's really important to consider the latest and greatest in science. When you look at, well, what is all this infrastructure being built to accommodate? It wasn't until 2019 that we really updated our specifications for, well, what is the 100-year storm in Chicago? It was a 30-year gap. So before 2019, we were really building things based off of 1989 specifications, and based off of the new reports and the new science that we have on how climate change can bring heavier storms, the 100-year storm is now carrying 1 inch extra of rain in the Chicago area. So many of these projects that have been recently built, but prior to 2019, are already outmoded. So that's something to, how frequently should we be updating the science to look at how are we building our infrastructure, and are we building for the infrastructure that can accommodate the future of climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, from an economics and policy perspective, Elena's point about showing the return on investment from things like green infrastructure, or from the projects that nobody sees, as Martin has discussed, right? And I think it's a combination of all these things. Like, if we think about the city can only do so much, only so much of the land is publicly owned. What are the incentives? What are the economic incentives or the policy mechanisms that can be created to get people to do things with private land, right? And some of that comes from, regulation and stormwater fees, but a lot could be done through land use planning and through zoning, right? Like hydrologically based zoning, that could be something that could change a lot of how we build in Chicago and support some of the visions that Martin has laid out as well. I think I'm going to ask maybe one more question, then turn it over to the audience questions, because I think this is an important one that brings together everything we've been talking about here in the vision of the blue city. I'm curious if we can think about how this water is a catalyst for economic growth that Elena talked about, that Martin talked about. how do we ensure that people don't get left behind, right? Is water, if water is a valuable resource, it's sometimes becomes so valuable, it becomes a commodity that prices people out. And so I'm wondering, how can we ensure access and availability of safe drinking water and protection from water hazards as this basic human right, but still be using water as this catalyst for economic growth? And so I don't know who wants to take on that difficult question, but I'll put it out there anyway.
I can maybe start. I was thinking about a response to another Blue Jobs question in the chat that relates, which is, what is a blue job anyway? And how do you get on that career path? And I think the answer to that question is a piece of this inclusive path, right? Because I don't know about all the other panelists, but I did not grow up thinking I would have a water job, but I did grow up loving water. And water, I think, has this really powerful force, right? It's like people are excited by it, they have personal relationships with it. So if you take that in a child or a young adult, and you take that interest and passion and say, you know, if you love this, here's the really hundreds of career paths that love and passion can open up for you. You know, you could work to be an engineer. You can work in trades on this massive infrastructure, you know, replacement work that we're going to have to be doing. You could work on the policy issues that, you know, intersect all of these issues. You could go into microbial biology. There's so many different domains. And so I think that's the opportunity here. It's also what makes the blue economy framing so challenging, because in a way, water is sort of everything. And it's like cities are everything, and you're interested in cities. Well, how do you turn that into a job? So I think it's the challenge and the opportunity, and what is, I think, the imperative for all of us that are working with leadership is to say, we have some really specific opportunities that, you know, will both solve our challenges in water and create jobs. What are those? How do we get them in front of the broadest range of people and make sure that we have training pathways so that people are seeing those opportunities and preparing for them, you know, 10, 20 years before we know we have this future we're planning for, right? It's not like we have some time. In some way it's urgent, but we should be thinking about the jobs that we're going to need in 20 years and preparing people for them now. That's my start at an answer.
Maybe I could add on a little bit to that. There are some universities that are opening water science programs and other kind of water-based programs. And I've sort of been sitting back waiting for Chicago to take that opportunity, one of the universities. And other universities in other parts of the country and world certainly have. But I would like to see higher education get involved as well with some kind of program that can get people tracking to be innovators and scientists, and I think Seth is involved in this for sure. But I would love to see this Chicago, one or more universities here really start a new program, cutting edge water program.
I think just to add a little bit to that, I think that there's been a lot of conversation too, just about, you know, water equity, you know, given, you know, how much water rates have risen across the Great Lakes, not only here in Chicago, but, you know, across the Great Lakes. You know, I think that we've had a huge wake up just with COVID-19, just in terms of how much, or well, just exactly like, you know, Crane Chicago Business has reported, in that more people are reliant on water from home. There's been a moratorium on, you know, water shutoffs. But I think that now, if any time, has been, you know, kind of this wake up call to what an important resource that we have, and looking at, you know, water rates, you know, equitably. I mean, if you look just southwest of Chicago, you know, the third largest city in Illinois, Joliet, which is dependent on groundwater, is poised to run out by 2030. And their water rates, as a result of purchasing water from Chicago, which was recently, you know, reported, it's expected to triple their water rates there. So how do you make sure that you're not pricing people out of a city like Joliet? I think it's still an open question.
Absolutely. If I could maybe merge one of the questions from the Q&A with a question that a student in my class submitted, because I told them I would ask it if they submitted it. The question is really about a lot of the solutions that we've been sort of talking about are sort of technology driven, right? And certainly, you know, we want to think about behavior change and awareness. And I think those fit together. Obviously, technology can facilitate behavior change and greater awareness. So I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts about sort of the maybe the low technology, the things that we can do in our everyday lives as individuals or as you know, property owners or as, you know, developers, and how these smaller actions kind of can fit with the bigger sort of investments in technology and infrastructure. And part of this is really gets to like what Tony and Seth have done is a lot of writing for popular audiences to create awareness, right? I think that fits in there as well. But I was curious if anyone had thoughts about that.
I can jump in with one point, which is
Sure.
far and away the biggest impact you can have on your own water footprint is through your diet. The more plant-based your diet is, the lower your water footprint will be, and your diet is probably your largest water footprint. So if you want to make one change to make a big difference, it's not about, you know, turning off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth. That helps, but a much bigger dent will be made by eating less meat and dairy.
Yeah, as an architect, we work with people to make sure that the stormwater from rainwater and some gray water also doesn't enter the sewer system, which contributes to other people's basements flooding, as well as significant costs and infrastructure failure. And so from an architecture point of view and landscape point of view, there are numerous ways to make sure that buildings can hold on to all the water that falls on their site. It can be used as a landscape amenity, or it can be saved and reutilized as gray water, certain types of gray water. The Illinois EPA has some things to say about that, but there are ways to also reduce a person's water footprint through their house or their office or their business place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd encourage you to. MWRD does a really terrific like water challenge every year where they put out like a number of really surprising ways that you can save water and kind of encourage everybody to, I'm looking for the link while we're talking and I will put in the chat if I can find it. But it is, to Seth's point, it's things that you don't necessarily think of as the individual water savings. But I also want to come back, when we say technology, I think people often think like, you know, bits and bytes and where it's hardware and software and we're building things, but I also think of like the green infrastructure solutions as very much, you know, technologies. It's really ways that we're interacting with our world and creating solutions. And the Rain Ready program that I mentioned is sort of one way. I think these, you know, there are certainly others where just understanding how as an individual you are, you know, empowered to change your environment and improve your water consumption, but there are some really interesting water technologies as well that are coming out to help do things like improve water quality in your household, right? And I think the opportunity there is to make sure that everybody's able to access that and it doesn't become a sort of thing where, you know, you're able to pay for, you know, expensive upgrades to your infrastructure and there's people who can't. And I think that's always a concern with technology deployment.
Great. So a question from our audience, which is related, where are spaces for bringing community members into these projects as early and upstream as possible so they feel re-empowered by these ideation processes too?
Some of the projects that we've worked on are urban agriculture-based projects, especially community gardens and school gardens, things of that sort. And especially with school children, when they realize that they don't need an irrigation system and actually shouldn't have an irrigation system, but can count on rain and store that rain either directly or indirectly, and talk about how capturing rain from a broader area and bringing it over to their site, to their urban agriculture site, I think is really fascinating to people. And this can happen as a passive technology. And I think people, once they understand that that's a possibility and they don't have to have a hose to basically grow food, that's a more artificial type of infrastructure, it's exciting to people. You know, the first infrastructure we ever built as a human race were agricultural irrigation systems based around gravity before electrical grids and everything else. You know, these are old technologies, perhaps the oldest technologies. And we almost have to relearn these things because we've forgotten that water will flow downhill if we design it to do that. And there's simple things that can be done that fascinate people and can get them engaged, I think.
Great, thank you. I know also with some of the local projects like the Metropolitan Planning Council's Great Rivers Chicago, they had a whole series of community engagement meetings to really think about how people related and connected to their waterway, the river system. And so I don't know if those results are available online, but that really went into their planning process. So I know that it exists. I think certainly we can always do more of that though, to better understand. I think, you know, how people sort of think about water in Chicago. And I really liked your point, Tony, about Lake Michigan being sort of synonymous with the city of Chicago. And it'd be interesting to know how different people perceive that, right? Like how much access people have to the lakefront. And we think that the lakefront is free for all, right? That was the design, but it's not really the case. It's very hard to access in certain parts of the city. So I know we're almost out of time, but I think I'm gonna ask one more question. We've got some of our one attendee saying we could listen to all of you for one more hour, which I'm sure we all could, but in the interest of everybody's time, let me ask one more question about climate change. There's a couple questions here about climate change, and from this audience member, a recent report shows that Cook County is the #3 most vulnerable from the climate risk standpoint, and yet one of the best suited for investments to address these risks in the Midwest, what I think is what some of you are talking about. Any thoughts on climate risks and opportunities that are specific to Chicago?
I can jump in maybe with an opportunity. You know, every time there's a crisis, there's an opportunity. And Martin touched deeply on this, but we've kind of danced around a concept here, which is the concept of virtual water, which is underappreciated, I think, in the world of water and how we manage water. We think about managing water literally, you know, the actual flow of water, but because so much water is needed to make goods, this is the manufacturing processes that Martin was referring to, that you really have to get a handle on that if you want to manage water. And as water stress becomes very pervasive in other parts of the world, including other parts of our country, some very nearby, that is going to drive manufacturing to the places where the water is, because you can't move water very large distances without tremendous energy expense. So there is unquestionably an opportunity here in Chicagoland to pull water intensive manufacturing, which is what Martin was getting at. And then you export the goods, right? So you're moving water, but you're moving it in virtual form because it was the water footprint of the object that gets moved. Huge economic opportunity for the region. But back to the policy point, right now there are virtually no policies that oversee this movement of virtual water within the country or across international boundaries. And that's going to be something that needs to be solved if we're going to do this sustainably.
I think the greatest opportunity is population growth. And that one's very difficult to get our hands around right now in Chicago. But if insurance companies start to mandate that people prove that they have water for, let's say, 30 years on a mortgage or something, which they're starting to do, all of a sudden, there might be a chance to pull people back, essentially, from the warm weather. Yeah, don't tell them it snows here. Don't any photographs of what's happening outside right now. But there is a possibility of growth over time based around availability and inexpensive water that do not have these economic liabilities attached to them. So I think that's out there.
And related to the need for people to come back, I think is also this, Chicago has more available space and ability to add density than almost any large city. I mean, there's really an interesting opportunity to think about how we use land. This links to everyone's points, right? But Seth's point about where would you attract, you know, next generation industry. I look at what's happened down in Pullman, where there was, you know, there's really great housing stock and opportunity for really thoughtful redevelopment and great clean industry. I mean, the method plant that's there, I mean, job creation, like that, I think is one really exciting model for equitable, like blue economy type development, right? Where you see the opportunity to, add density in a really smart way, add mixed use, bring in industry at scale, and that, there is this proximity to the lake. So I would love to see more of that and think about how we use the land that we have and use it as a catalyst to bring people back and industry forward.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I would say just to consider that, water is one of our greatest assets, but it's also one of our greatest threats. When you consider, flooding and flood potential here. But I mean, I totally agree with the rest of the panel in that, it's going to be an asset as we see more water crises across the nation. And I'm sure that it will be a kind of a calling card that I'm sure that the city of Chicago, which has room to grow, will be using going forward, is this access. I mean, not only for the city of Chicago, but for its 125, suburbs that it provides water for as well. And we're going to be adding more of those as Joliet and other cities, I'm sure, will be latching on. But I think that there are a lot of just, kind of common sense, solutions that can be had. I mean, if we look at the way, and I hate to keep on going back to the shoreline, but I mean, I think a lot of people, when they, think about Chicago, they think of the shoreline and the tourism that brings in, but think about how unsafe that is in certain, instances where, you have those steep drop-offs that I showed in the slideshow, which allows for very high waves, and especially when we have lake level fluctuation. If that was, and I think that we've seen that in different projects like Redefine the Drive, where we're looking at, well, how can we mitigate flooding on Lakeshore Drive? Well, make the shoreline as it was, once intended, which was a slope. Waves can't break like that if you have a sloped shoreline instead of these steep drop-offs that allow these tsunami-esque waves. So I think that there are simple solutions that we can do. Sure, it will cost money, but it will contribute to public safety too.
Great, thank you so much, everybody. I know we're out of time. I wanted to just quickly mention that we have two related to what you were just talking about in our Chicago Future series. We have the Third Coast City and the Available City, which is about what to do with Chicago's vacant land coming up. So related to everything that you've just been discussing. I wanted to thank all of our presenters. I'm going to turn it back to Tess in a second, but I want to thank all of you for joining us. This was a fascinating conversation, and I hope we can all meet together and have dinner soon and talk more about this. And I want to thank our co-sponsors, Argonne and Current. And again, thank you all for joining. I'll turn it back to Tess, who I think is going to close us out here.
Sure. Right, as Sabina said, thank you to all the panelists and attendees for joining us today. I just wanted to add again, if you enjoyed this presentation, be sure to check out the Chicago Cities Quarter on Water's Metropolis on the Chicago Cities website. Again, one of the classes being offered is being taught by today's lecturer, Sabina Shaikh. I should also add that a recording of this event, in addition to the resources and recommendations that were mentioned throughout this entire conversation, will be available on our website in just a couple days. So I hope you check back, and thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.